Hello, I'm Nathan P. Butler, author of a Saga on Home Video and host of From the Star Wars Home Video Library here on YouTube, and this is Star Wars Home Video Year by Year. This time we take a look at 1980. So this is a big year for Star Wars, obviously. We'd had the novelization of A New Hope released back at the end of 1976, but for most people, the beginning of Star Wars is the launch of the original film in May of 1977. We'd seen that film get re-released in 78 and 79. It will be again in 81. But in 1980, there's no re-release of that film because there's a new film on the horizon. Star Wars II, The Empire Strikes Back. No, not actually Star Wars II. Whereas George Lucas had talked about Star Wars initially as one film he was just hoping to get made, and then started talking about it as the original film being the first of 12, by the time we get to 1980 and the actual release of The Empire Strikes Back, of course, it is Episode 5, which retroactively makes the original film Episode 4, though it won't have the subtitle until the following year or its episode number. So, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, gets released in 1980. And yes, you get the opportunity to learn what happens next, right? What happens after the events of the original film, and whoa, you can get your mind blown about the big revelation about the Skywalker family with Vader and Luke and everything. You can have your minds blown and know what's next in April of 1980. Yes, April of 1980, because once again, the novelization of the film got released before the film itself, which actually is typically the case for Star Wars. So in April of 1980, you could have found out the basics of the story. There were some differences between the final film and the novelization, but yeah, you could have gotten it straight up with no, I am your father, and all of that. Imagine if internet troll culture existed in 1980. People were bickering about something stupid like, well, I like Obi-Wan's saber because it's blue. Well, no, I like Vader's saber because it's red. No, it's not red. It looked kind of pink on my screen, back and forth and back and forth. Oh yeah? Well, Vader is Luke's father. Suck it! Spoiling things for anyone who was still waiting another month for the film. You could totally see that happening today. Back then, a calmer, gentler time. I guess, to an extent, or maybe it's just the fact that we didn't have the internet. But suffice to say, the novelization didn't dampen the impact when people actually saw it in theaters, and we got the big revelation, of course, that Vader was Luke's father, and then we're left waiting for 3 more years to figure out what on earth that would mean. Was he telling the truth, and so forth, waiting for Return of the Jedi, or Revenge of the Jedi, depending on when you were looking at the marketing. But if the film we now know as A New Hope was going to take 5 years to reach home media, that must mean that the pattern was that it would take a while for things to hit home video, so The Empire Strikes Back couldn't hit home video that year, at least not in full form, as we see with the original film in 1982. That's right, we're not going to see The Empire Strikes Back hit home video in full until 1984. But that doesn't mean there weren't little, as I've said before, glimmers of hope for those who are wanting to check it out at home. We also see another pattern arising in 1980 that we will see repeated throughout the history of Star Wars on home video. So let's dive into what actually existed in 1980 for home viewing. First off, if you were excited about The Empire Strikes Back, yes, Ken Films was at it again with another 3 Super 8 reels. Not as many as last time, and not as varied as last time, but yes, 3 Super 8 reels. We'll do the one that I find most interesting last. So we start with the larger reels. There was a first reel here, which was not actually labeled as Reel 1, but the first reel here. And then a second reel that did actually get labeled as 2. Again, these are selected scenes. It's not the entire film or anything. In this case, for example, it's only 17 minutes long. But at least you get some scenes from The Empire Strikes Back to watch at home. What I find most interesting is that they only did one small one this time. Color and sound, rather than black and white with no sound, color with no sound, and color and sound like we saw with the original film. Instead, we get this. What I think is really cool about it is what is noted there with this little label on it here. The film reel itself is nothing surprising, but if you take it out of there, packaged underneath it is an audio cassette. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who are young enough to be like, what the hell is that? This is an audio cassette. Before streaming, before MP3s, before CDs, this was what we would listen to music on. This is kind of what followed LPs before they came back, like vinyl, followed a 8-track and so on. But basically, this was color and sound, but for the sound, you would actually listen to it using this audio cassette rather than having the sound with the actual reel itself. Pretty cool there, an interesting approach to it, I think. No, I did not intentionally wear the shirt that says "not old vintage" with a cassette on it for this episode, but I guess it fits. And that, by the way, is the end of the Kin Films Star Wars film reels. There would be none from Kin Films for Return of the Jedi because by then, other media had really supplanted Super 8 in the home. Speaking of those other formats, though, remember in 1979, we saw the first Star Wars releases of any kind on VHS and Beta, but they weren't the film. Instead, it was the 1977 ABC aired The Making of Star Wars as told by C-3PO and R2-D2 being released in home media in those formats. Well, one of the things we're going to see a lot with Star Wars home video is that we often see reissues of products over and over again. Sometimes unchanged, sometimes with packaging change, sometimes the same program, but with maybe a different bonus feature or new bonus features where there were none before. But we see a lot of reissues of the same stuff. Otherwise, how do you get a library as ridiculously large as this? Well, we see that pattern actually starting very early here in 1980. Well, here in 1980, we see a re-release, essentially, of that special from 1979 on VHS and Beta on a new 1980 version. And they do have one new feature on each. This is the VHS release, and as you can see here, it's pretty prominent as to what is new. This still has the same special from 1977. The special itself is unchanged. I don't think I mentioned last time, but the special is hosted by William Conrad, or at least the narration is by William Conrad, whereas the actual hosts speaking to the audience are C-3PO and R2-D2. The reason I mention that is that we will eventually see one version in all the reissues of this, one version that doesn't use William Conrad as the voiceover artist for it. But we have here the same special, except after the special, so you gotta watch the whole thing all the way to the end, you now have a special preview, or plus exciting new scenes from The Empire Strikes Back. Just a little Empire Strikes Back trailer immediately after the production. We also saw this re-released on Beta. It says, special bonus, preview inside. Well, on the cassette. It's not inside the packaging, it's on the cassette itself. But there was a beta release of it as well. So yes, The Making of Star Wars returns to VHS and Beta. It's already got a re-release and nothing else has gotten a release at all. This time with The Empire Strikes Back getting a preview after the program on either version from Magnetic Video. Otherwise, really nothing else to speak of in 1980. The end of the Kin Films line with 3 more film reels, a reissue basically with a new trailer for The Making of Star Wars, and that's it. But Star Wars fans certainly had plenty to be excited about with The Empire Strikes Back in theaters. Unless I think you were in the theater where I saw it. So I was born in '79. I was less than a year old in 1980. My mom says she did take me to go see The Empire Strikes Back with her in theaters when I was a baby. If that is the case and I was loud, I apologize in retrospect to anyone who was in the theater that day. There are a few things more annoying in a movie theater than a baby. I apologize. Next time, we finally fill in that last gap year between when A New Hope hit theaters in '77 and when it finally hits home video in 1982 by taking a look at, of course, 1981.